Israel just launched, Zoe, these major airstrikes on Gaza earlier this week in the deadliest attack since this U.S. brokered quote unquote ceasefire was announced. And President Donald Trump defended the attacks along with little Marco Rubio. I'm just going to stick with that name. Trump came up with it, but I love it. I think it's fantastic. But in all seriousness, this ceasefire violation by the Israelis killed over 100 Palestinians, including some 46 children on Wednesday. Here is what Trump and Rubio had to say when they were on Air Force One.
Or they bombed Gaza, and is it still a ceasefire?
Yeah, it's a ceasefire. It is. No, they had a sniper, and one of their soldiers were killed, and they did retribution. So we'll see. But yeah, it is a ceasefire. It's back to ceasefire.
What is that?
What is the thinking behind?
Talking about the strike against the Palestinian Jihad individuals?
Yes.
Yeah, look, Israel didn't surrender its right to self-defense. Obviously, the ceasefire is based on obligations on both sides. By the way, we'd also like to see Hamas speed up the return of hostage bodies. We still have 13 hostages, 2 Americans included. But we don't view that as a violation of the ceasefire. They have a right. There's an imminent threat to Israel, and all the mediators agree with that.
Well, there you have it, guys. There's still a ceasefire, despite the fact that Israel just killed over 100 people, according to the people who gave us the ceasefire. So joining us to discuss all of this is Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of Drop Site News and one of the few Western journalists in regular contact with Hamas leaders, to discuss why Israel, with U.S. complicity, is undermining the ceasefire and what the next phases of this ongoing genocide could look like. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be with you.
So let's just jump right into it. I mean, the ceasefire, we're supposedly in ceasefire mode, but this is not the first time. I believe every single day there's been a ceasefire violation. The last count I saw was something like 128. So can you just give us some idea of what this ceasefire means so far? Because it seems like from what we're seeing, one side is ceasing fire and the other side is continuing.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's important to understand what's happening right now as the Trump administration trying to seize opportunity that is a mixture of what Trump and his largely neoconservative foreign policy team wants to achieve in the long term in the Middle East. They were enthusiastically behind Israel's genocidal war. They've been fully backing Netanyahu's attempt to serve as the arsonist in chief of the Middle East. And Trump is mixing together the business of imperial America with his personal business. And so part of what we're seeing here is that Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, his special envoy, of course, is a lifelong real estate man. They're looking to make a lot of money, not just in the context of their official capacity for the U.S. government, but on a private level. And so if we understand that Trump may have forced Netanyahu to kind of restructure his war of annihilation temporarily, and that Netanyahu remains a kind of pit bull that the United States has been very happy to unleash on the region, that Trump is sort of keeping close-ish to the leg, but still allowing it to viciously attack other people. And my apologies to pit bulls. They can be actually quite gentle dogs, so maybe that's not the most appropriate thing, but he has this vicious monster actually. And Nasrallah, the late Secretary General of Hezbollah, often address this issue of who's actually in control, the United States or Israel. And I think that what Trump is showing is that the United States is in control right now in the sense that they can impose some form of restraint, force Netanyahu to only kill 10 Palestinians a day instead of killing 100 to 200 Palestinians a day. There's a level on which Trump saved Israel from itself in this, because the Palestinians were not surrendering. They were not raising the white flag. Israel was not, in fact, able to retrieve its captives in Gaza through the use of military force, and in a way was forced to go to the negotiating table with Hamas and Islamic Jihad and with the Palestinian people. On the other hand, Israel sees opportunity in this, and I would say that they're still in pole position because you have little Marco coming out, popping from behind Trump's shoulder to really drive the point home that Israel is going to be able to strike whenever it fabricates or comes up with some rationalization for why it's okay to do a drone strike or why it's okay to launch missiles into Gaza. But at the end of the day, the war of annihilation, and I've been saying this, since this so-called ceasefire was signed, it's more important now than ever for us to be vigilant and not take our eyes off of Palestine, because the war of annihilation is continuing. This, Rania, in the very big sense, is an attempt by the United States and Israel to achieve through fabricated diplomacy, claims of a ceasefire, claims of the greatest peace plan in 3,000 years, for them to achieve through these kinds of agreements and trickery by trying to co-opt Arab states and other Islamic states to the Israeli-U.S. Zionist agenda, to compel the Palestinians to surrender when for 77 years they've refused to do so under the iron fist of militarism that's been unleashed against them.
Jeremy, in the past 2 years, it seemed like kind of insane because on one hand, you have Israel attacking Gaza, attacking Palestine as it's done. But there were times when it was bombing Syria, Lebanon, Iran, all at the same time, even launch airstrikes on Qatar. Yet we saw Arab states line up behind Donald Trump when there were talks in Egypt. As we said, the Pakistani prime minister saying that Trump should win the Nobel Peace Prize. But really, there is this deep complicity and sort of excitement from Arab states for this deal, for this ceasefire. What do you think is behind this? And what is their vision with this ceasefire and with Trump's vision for the region?
I mean, it's a great question. It's one of the central questions, but it doesn't just have one answer. I think we have to look at the different spheres of influence that have emerged in all of this. On the one hand, I would say that you have one sphere that is largely populated by Egypt and Turkey. And I think that in the case of both Egypt and Turkey, they're not interested in seeing Palestine completely wiped out or even seeing Hamas and the Palestinian armed resistance thoroughly destroyed. In the case of Egypt, Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. military aid, second only to Israel. Egypt patrols the only international border that Palestine has out of Gaza, which is the Rafah crossing. And yes, the Israelis, even when technically the crossing was quote unquote open, the Israelis were in large control of it. But the Egyptians, and I think, Palestinians are very well aware of this, Palestinians involved with the negotiations. The Egyptians want to see Hamas and the Palestinian armed resistance severely weakened, but they see some geostrategic benefit to having a Palestinian armed resistance, in part because of Egypt's own interests and own relevance to the United States. Turkey has emerged as a force in the world under Erdogan that is increasingly involved with diplomacy, views itself as a bridge between NATO and Europe and the broader Middle East. And Erdogan also, I think, sees a lot of common ground with Trump. And part of this is also transactions that extend beyond the White House and into the realm of private industry and private business, as we said before. And the other side of this, you have Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The Saudis are looking at this and they're saying, wait a minute, Qatar just got a mutual defense agreement with the United States that is very similar to the Article 5 pact within NATO, these mutual defense agreements that an attack against one is an attack against all. Saudi Arabia has been licking U.S. boots for decades, wanting something of this nature. And the Qataris come in and they get this. And what I've been told recently by sources who've been in the negotiations is that in the case of both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that they actually want Israel to be empowered to fully destroy Hamas and the Palestinian armed resistance, in part because of fears that Hamas and the Palestinians that are fighting against Israel are an inspiration to Arabs and Muslims around the world. And these decrepit, corrupt monarchies, the thing they fear the most are actual Muslims in their countries who are saying, you don't represent our religion. You don't represent our vision of the world. You're corrupt. You're thieving all of the natural resources. You're collaborating with the Zionists. You're collaborating with the United States. And so, the Saudis and the Emiratis, in large part, I think are perfectly happy to watch Israel continue its war of annihilation, despite the lip service that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia pays to the notion of a two-state solution and ending the genocide. But yes, I mean, Palestinians throughout this genocide, you're correct to point out, have said, what's the point of all of these armies that these Arab nations have when you witness an attempt to completely annihilate the Palestinian people as a people in this world? You watch a live streaming of the genocide, the burning of children alive in tents, the scorched earth bombing, the terrorism that is sponsored by the United States, and you do nothing but issue strongly worded statements. Or in the case of some Arab states, you actually join the United States and Israel in trying to counter Iran's response militarily to Israel attacking Iran. So, we're watching a world right now in which all of these leaders, most of these leaders from around the Arab world, have bent the knee to Donald Trump. They're making all of these business deals with both Trump the man and Trump the president. And they're essentially in front of the world being made to admit that they understand Israel is allowed to bomb any country that it wishes in the region. It's bombed roughly 9 countries since this started 2 years ago. You mentioned the bombing of Qatar. That's an interesting case. September 9th, Israel launches strikes, 12 missiles, against the building in Doha, the capital of Qatar, where Hamas had its offices. Hamas had established diplomatic offices in Qatar in large part because the United States government wanted the Qataris to be able to negotiate with them. And it's also the headquarters of U.S. Central Command, which is the most strategically important military facility in the Middle East. The idea that Israel was able to launch these attacks against Qatar without the knowledge of or agreement of the United States to do so is just an implausible reality to imagine. The question is whether the United States was in on that bombing plot of this Hamas facility, or they just allowed the Israelis to do it. But the fact is that right now, Israel has shown for 2 years that no one is going to restrain it when it comes to attacking countries around the region. And I think that a lot of these countries are just trying to make sure that they get in on the Gaza privatization deal that Trump wants to push through.
It's really, truly incredible. I mean, just as an aside, I was in Lebanon when the Israelis bombed Qatar, and I'm smiling a little bit only because that was like for the first time we were messaging our friends in all the Gulf states being like, you guys okay? Because it's usually the other way around. But in all seriousness, I mean, yeah, it's these Gulf states should be more worried about the people that actually bomb them or are threatening to bomb them. Because Israel, basically, I think one of the Israeli spokespeople, or maybe it was like the speaker of the Knesset, had tweeted something insane like this is a message to all Arab states when they had bombed the countries. But all that to say, Jeremy, I want to move this conversation to the U.S. front for a moment because Israel is basically militarily supreme in the Middle East right now. They've, at least for now, defeated or pacified many of their enemies. The region, I don't see any source of real resistance to Israel at this point militarily. However, the world hates Israel. World public opinion hates Israel. U.S. public opinion has turned on Israel because of what they've done over the last 2 years. So they have kind of moved their front over to the U.S. They've joined forces with the Trump administration to try to suppress the movement for Palestine here, and to try to attack our First Amendment rights, our due process rights, to try to suppress the anti-Israel sentiment that's growing. And you see a backlash specifically in the base of the Democratic Party where AIPAC, I never thought I'd see this happen, has become almost like poison to the point where you had someone like Senator Seth Moulton, hardly, some like progressive. I mean, he's pretty centrist, but he returned his AIPAC money. So, I mean, that obviously is more of a symbolic gesture. But what do you make of this shift we see where Israel's increasingly becoming aligned with the far right of the Republican Party, where even there's like some tension growing? I mean, half of the right-wing base or MAGA base thinks that Israel killed Charlie Kirk. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's not true. They think it. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that shift in the U.S.
Well, I mean, Seth Moulton is actually a good example because, yes, on the one hand, he seized a moment of political opportunity and recognizes that the winds are blowing in a different direction. And so he says, oh, well, I'm not going to take AIPAC money. But then within, I think it was 24, although it may have been 48 hours of saying that, he went on national television to clarify that he's going to continue to do this work for free, even if he doesn't get the AIPAC money. And I think that there's a way in which that kind of captures a certain dynamic within the Democratic Party. I mean, you had Charlemagne the God labeling Hakeem Jeffries, the lead Democrat in the House, AIPAC Shakur. And you've had a Democratic Party that has been a total servant of this genocidal war. If anyone should go down in history as the butcher of Gaza, it should be Joe Biden. Kamala Harris had a chance when she assume the reins of the 2024 Democratic nomination through an undemocratic process to differentiate herself. All of her advisors were constantly messaging to the Washington Post or other media outlets, oh, Kamala's very concerned about this. She's been raising these concerns about the death toll among Palestinians privately. And then she's finally asked about, what she would do differently. And she says, I would do nothing differently. So the Democrats cast their lot with this policy of radical Zionism and genocide, and they delivered Trump. If the Democrats want to talk about who's responsible for what we're witnessing right now, in both the case of the Gaza genocide, where Joe Biden, who was the most dedicated Zionist to serve in political office in the United States, a 50-plus year in political office, where he was a servant of a radical Zionist agenda, they delivered this Gaza genocide. They could have shut it down before Trump was even elected president, but they facilitated a sabotage of ceasefire agreements. Then the Democrats run on a campaign where their candidate says that she would do nothing different from Joe Biden. Gaza was a major issue in this election. Trump actually forces a ceasefire through in the dying days of the Biden administration for his own reasons. It lasts for 42 days. The Democrats still say almost nothing when Trump then allows Israel to abandon the ceasefire deal in March, reimpose a full spectrum blockade on Gaza, and then begin scorched earth terror bombings. The Democrats even had a chance then, when it was quote unquote Trump's war, to come out and say something. And yet you have this silence. Even the best that the Democratic Party can produce on a kind of large level, Bernie Sanders, he almost never says the word Israel. He says, oh, the right-wing Netanyahu government. He acts as though he's not aware of the public opinion polling in Israel that shows a solid majority of Israelis firmly behind this genocidal war. So young people in this country, working people in this country, and that applies all around the world, not just in the United States. For the first time, the world sees the totally naked truth about the nature of this serial killer enabled by the United States that masquerades as a nation state. That's what this is. It's a European colonial settler entity that operates as a serial killer with full support of the United States and masquerades as a nation state. The world sees this now. And so the Democratic Party, Rania, in the United States has a real choice before itself. Are you going to listen to the will of your own people and of the rest of the world on this issue? Or are you going to continue to facilitate figures like Donald Trump holding power in the United States? Because young people are rejecting the New York Times. They're rejecting all of the cable news networks. That's not where they get their information. They are much more independent thinkers. The Israelis have diluted the term anti-Semitism by misusing it and applying it to anyone who opposes their policies, including Jews around the world, to the point where young people aren't afraid of that label anymore. It used to send shockwaves through someone to be accused of that. But when everyone is an anti-Semite, no one is an anti-Semite, and it's Netanyahu and the Israeli government and the US government that's promoted, that's been responsible for that. There is real anti-Semitism in the world. The force that has made it so that we can't have a real discussion about it is a state that claims to be a Jewish state, is a state that claims to be representing a religion when in fact Jews around the world have been rejecting this even before the genocide began. So we're in a moment I'm sorry to go on for so long, Rania, but we're in a moment where we have a government that is using stormtroopers masquerading as ICE. They're rounding up our brothers and sisters because of their immigration status or because they're suspected of having a certain immigration status, and it turns out that they're American citizens, where they're trying to criminalize speech. And Palestine has, I know you know this, Rania, but Palestine has always been the canary in the coal mine on these so-called terror laws. When you research how these terror laws got on the books in the United States, it goes back to attacking people who were either Palestinian or were advocating for the rights of Palestinians. We are living in a perilous moment. And Trump himself can stand up and laugh and say, I thought I was going to see resistance from the Democrats. And instead, we have the average age of the leaders of the Democratic Party. It's like in their early hundreds. Like they were around, some of these people were like adults when the Balfour Declaration was imposed. So how, it's the Democratic Party is in an existential crisis that it refuses to recognize. If there was ever a moment to show actual resistance, it would be now. And yet, again, I go back to it. It's young people, it's working people around the world who see the truth as though it's true, and that's very dangerous for established politicians.
Well, I think the last
Go ahead,
before
Zoe.
no, before we let you go,
Keep
I just
doing
wanted to touch on one point you said, and I think you referred to it now again, but it's that, this hasn't ended. It is a ceasefire for only one side, and you said that now is not the time to let up. What do you see the next period looking like? What is needed from the millions of people around the world that have been activated in the struggle for Palestine? And what's next?
Look, I mean, what I can tell you from talking to sources and covering this, and not just people from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but from across the political spectrum in Palestine, they recognize that this is a do or die moment, that they're at a crossroads. What Trump is advocating is a neo-colonial agenda that is seeking to wipe out the Palestinian cause of liberation once and for all. And that's why the Palestinians very wisely are saying that they want a democratic coalition that represents the diverse tapestry of Palestinian society to be negotiating what comes next, not just Hamas, not just Islamic Jihad. Those were the primary armed wings that were fighting against this genocidal war. But now it's the question of what is Palestine and the cause going to look like? What about the question of disarmament? Palestinians are saying it's not about Hamas giving up weapons. What you're trying to do is use disarmament as a proxy for surrender. What you're telling us and what Macron and other European leaders are saying when they say that the Palestinians must be disarmed as part of a two-state solution is you don't want us to actually have a state. You want us to live in little mini Bantustans. You want us to live as third or fourth class citizens. If anything, right now, we should also be focusing our energy and our attention and constantly promoting the voices of Palestinians from the occupied West Bank. Because while Trump may have Netanyahu at somewhat of a kind of restrained position where they're killing a lower number of Palestinians every day, Gaza genocide could resume at any moment. That's true. But the West Bank is being dismantled. It's in the midst of the largest forced displacement campaign since 1967. You have constant attacks by paramilitaries, settlers who are totally empowered by the Israeli military. So ordinary, everyday people, I know all of you are on social media. Find voices from the occupied West Bank, find Palestinian voices and promote them. Let people know, don't take your eyes off the occupied West Bank. Yes, we should all be focused on Gaza, but the Israelis are already unfurling this war on the occupied West Bank. So it's keeping it in the conversation. It's pressuring any political elected official or candidate that you run into, you question them about this. It's not just about the AIPAC money. That can be a convenient thing. Oh, we don't take AIPAC money anymore. But if you do the same work for free, then it doesn't solve anything. AIPAC can come and go. Yeah. It's the issue of, do you support this radical, violent ideology of Zionism? And do you think that the United States should be facilitating an arsonist masquerading as a nation state?
Well, Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of Dropsite News, we appreciate your analysis and all of your important journalism. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both for the work you do.